So caste systems in place. Essentially they try to see if native folks can be slaves. That doesn't work out too well because the Spanish keep getting them sick with their fucking diseases. um,
Well, listen, why did you? I mean, I have ideas. I mean, I know you, but to the people outside, I mean, why did you want to talk about the colorism in Mexican American culture so much?
Yeah. Honestly, because it's the culture that we grew up in, Marcos. I mean, growing up in Eagle Pass, Texas, where it's 99.9%, Latinos, Mexicans, looking back on it, I felt like we grew up in like this really interesting little bubble of like, I was telling you over text the other day, like judging Mexicans from Mexico while, we're, Mexican Americans, but we still have, relatives and stuff in Mexico. Like, for example, like at the mall, we would see all the Coahuila license plates and it's like, everyone from Mexico is here. And like looking back on it, before and like hearing my grandparents say it, hearing my grandparents say it is wild because they're both from Mexico. Yeah. So, it was just embedded into our culture. And looking back on it now and like living in San Antonio and like, being around other ethnicities and like realizing that we grew up in a bubble, like looking back at all of these little things, it's like, oh, that's colorism. Oh, that's, not normal,
right.
So this is why that topic was just, very important to me. And like another reason is I'm in a biracial relationship. My boyfriend is Black, but he's also a little bit of Mexican, a little bit of Cuban, things like that. And kind of like the reaction around it, like, my grandparents are all dead. And, my parents are very cool, but like my friends' parents, being like, oh, this is what the Black guy, and it's just kind of like, we're really like still doing this in this day and age.
Let me take a look. Yep, we are. Yeah.
I mean, it's very unique that I was listening to some stand-up as I was trying to find like information and stats for this podcast. And then one by Felipe came up where he's like, so Mexicans, like if you close the door off, just start hating on other Mexicans. Like it's just like that dude becomes negro and you start talking shit about that guy. That dude becomes chino. Like it's just like,
right.
It's not good.
It really isn't.
Not. And the thing is we'll get into our own personal experiences, kind of our basis with it. I come out relatively unscathed, but there's still some bad things in there where it's like, oh my God, that's only one generation away from me. That's just a step away. And so luckily there's been some cleaning, but how do you want to introduce this topic, Marcos? Like what's the first, I guess, attack point you want to get into before we can open up the coconut, if you will.
Well, all right. I'm going to say these in English. They are phrases said in Spanish, but let's just dissect these 5 common things that are said in in Spanish households and see how you feel about them.
Can I request that you do it in Spanish first, then in English for our audience and me?
Okay. He was born Black, #dark. But we still love him the same.
What's that in Spanish? I would say, like I said, say in Spanish first, and then translate it.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Nació negrito, pero sí lo queremos.
Ugh. I don't know if we use that ever.
You never heard that one at all?
Never heard that one. He's heard
for sure. Maybe not the like todavía lo queremos part. Definitely the está negrito, pero todavía está bonito.
Yeah.
Like he's still kind of cute or está curiosito. Like which is like a kind of messed up way to say he looks curious. Like he looks interesting.
I mean, does anyone have a personal story? Is something that like really just to expose a wart and all.
Yeah.
Like about something that happened in their household that it was like it was one thing one way, and then later, like you look back on it after you've grown and left your hometown. In my case, and it's like that's really wasn't cool.
I have one with like my grandfather.
Mhm.
So my grandfather would always like tell, me and like his other grandchildren, like, don't be a Mexican your entire life. And it's like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, you are a Mexican man from Mexico. And like looking back at it, it's like, oh, ha ha ha, like, Weddle's just like making a joke, I guess, about his own people being lazy, but it's like that's it's so weird. Like it's like such like an internalized hatred that made me like very sad. Like when I look back and like reflected on it, it's like don't be a Mexican your entire life, but you are. And it's like just because you work a certain amount doesn't make you any less Mexican.
Right. That's so strange. Because did he think he wasn't? At a certain point, like, did he hit a level of success where he thought that, oh,
That's exactly what it
That's
is.
the thing. Like my grandfather was, he dropped out of school, by sixth grade so that he can get a job. He worked out in the field. He was a truck driver for a little while, and then he was an auto mechanic for like the rest of his life until he retired, and like lived like a very like humble life. And I don't know if it was like instilled in him in the army or something, but
yeah, that's crazy.
yeah.
Internalized depression is real.
Yeah.
This one was even more wild. I found this out maybe 4 months ago. 4 months ago, and mind you, like I'm starting to learn all. I'm over 30 now, so I'm starting to learn all the family secrets. My great grandmother, she passed away when I was 16, 102 years old, almost 103. We love Ma Maria. That's what we called her. She was a staple in the household forever. And then she had my grandma, and then my grandma had her kids, my dad, and his sisters. Apparently, she adored my oldest aunt, my Tia Mary, because she was ghost white, pale skin, and would reflect that in the gifts that she gave them during Christmas. Because my dad's not terribly dark, but he's darker. His brothers are darker, and then the girls are more fair skinned. But the girls, especially his oldest sister, got so much more from their grandmother than the boys got, than any of the girls that were darker skinned got. Apparently, she was excruciatingly colorist, like violently, to the point where my dad had to tell me, he goes, with my grandkids, everyone gets the same. Everyone gets the same amount, because it bothered him that much. Now, my grandmother, there's probably little bits of it with my half white and half white, half Mexican nieces and nephew. My sister married a white guy, and they were very light skinned, and they got to meet my grandma before she passed. I bet I know for a fact that she adored them maybe just a little bit more than my cousin's kids, who they stay in the sun. They get really, really dark and things like that. They're full Mexican kids, and they're beautiful kids. And my grandma loved them just the same. But her mom reflected I believe those kind of things, because my grandma was dark skinned, which that's kind of fucked up. That her own daughter was dark skinned, but because she had lighter skinned grandbabies, the grandbabies were treated better because they were lighter. And then her great grandkids were treated even better because my sisters were fair skinned too. So it's just like, I didn't notice it, and I didn't notice that my family got special treatment, my kind of deviation from the bloodline of the rest of my family, because we're a little bit more light skinned. My mom's lighter skin, my dad's medium. The fact that we have these kind of tiers, what indicates light and dark, we know what will get you treated right and what will get you treated wrong in our culture. And that's, for someone who doesn't really experience it too much, it's fucked up that I know so much about it.
Well, it's kind of funny that you bring up the word tiers, because I think David might want to take the ball on this point, but this is literally where colonialization comes into play, because it did start as those tiers being related to color. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about like the history of like after the Aztecs lost, like from once the encomienda started, what was life like socially for like probably the next 300 years.
Okay, cool. So and it's crazy because like and don't think I'm never like nitpicking. It's just like to point shit out.
Yeah.
Because I want to point out how rooted it is. Like, yeah, so they were known as, their name were the Mexica, and that's where the name Mexico comes from, from the Aztecs' real name. and then the Aztecs was the name that the Spanish gave them. Yeah, anyway, so after the Mexica were colonized by the Spanish, they set up encomiendas. Like they got this caste system going, and I don't know if you all have seen these charts before. If you ever took like a history class in college, well, they're pretty widespread, like on Google. But there's this caste system that broke down like superiority, I guess, based on skin tone within like the Spanish colonial system.
Yeah, if you can zoom that
It's a
in,
picture. It's a bunch of pictures actually.
Oh, okay.
You look
That's the one I was using, but I'll
okay,
find
got it. Yeah. Oh, but that's pretty much it. Yeah, exactly. But you'll see like there's this old like paintings of them. It's kind of just a trip to kind of see, and then it shows like the two adults and then like the baby that they have. Like,
oh yeah, I have seen that one.
They mix. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a trip, but it's like so when the argument is made nowadays that like race is a something that folks now are bringing up and making an issue, or like they constructed it. We're like, no, actually, like colonizers constructed the concept of race, and now folks are continuing to try to fight back against it and eliminate it, and now it's like a lack of recognition. But anyway,
Right.
So caste systems in place, essentially they try to see if native folks can be slaves. That doesn't work out too well because the Spanish keep getting them sick with their fucking diseases. So
Right.
like native folks don't make good slaves, aside from the fact that, a lot of them resist. There's always resistance. Wherever there's oppression, there's resistance. That's what I tell my students. But there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of death, and then there is a lot of conformity and conversion to Catholicism, and that's where you kind of see this intermingling of religions with like indigenous culture and Catholicism, for example, like with Dia de los Muertos, the most popular example, right?
Mhm.
Like calaveras and death and stuff isn't typically recognized within Catholicism, but the Spanish bent a little bit in that sense and allowed the indigenous folks to incorporate a little bit of their beliefs, as long as they kind of follow the letter of the law with the other Christian beliefs.
Right. And you bring up a lot of good points about just the fact that by creating that tier system based off of colorism, that it then informs you of your own value in this system that they made up afterwards. I always make this very basic joke that before the Aztecs, they were just fighting other people in the wrong part of the jungle. They all looked alike. They all about the same height. They're all probably related in the genealogy of things. It's just like, I don't like that guy. I'm going to sacrifice it to my sun god because fuck that guy. He's in a part of the jungle I want. They were all the same.
Partly, and no, because we're way more complex than that. And that's really colonialism too. Because when we talk about fucking the English, we get all intricate about.
Well, fuck them. We know that.
Little ways they navigated the land and all that shit and all the wagons they use and whatnot. Like, nah, we're complex as beings. And the Mexica were actually fucking colonized. Nah, they weren't colonizers, but they were definitely fucking
strategic in their yeah.
They were conquerors. There you go. That's a good word. They were conquerors.
Yeah.
And they like took over indigenous folks around them.
That's what I'm saying.
And they built. Yeah, that's how they built their empire. Like,
but it wasn't based because they were brown or dark. It was
right.
It was because I want their land. I want their land, and I want them out.
They never really conquered for land. They conquered for tribute. They conquered. Yeah. They had. I don't think the empire ever expanded out of the bowl. Is what it was. Like,
yeah, the Purépechas in Michoacán stopped them.
But so everything that he said was correct. I just wanted to add the idea of mestizaje or how can I say the word in English but not in Spanish? But I mean, say the word in Spanish but not in English.
Mestization.
But it wasn't just. So that was the caste system, but the Spanish idea was it was literally their policy to outbreed the anybody that was dark of colored. So, like he said, indigenous people didn't work too well because they got sick. So they brought in a lot of Afro people, and so after a while, when they looked at their population, they were worried about revolt, the same way in the United States became a thing that ended in the Civil War. But in Spain, I mean, in Mexico or Latin America, really, the policy was send white prostitutes to those areas. And also when Europeans come from across the sea, specifically put them in there so that the indigenous people or the Afro people will marry white people. And then eventually all that bad color will go away, like after enough breeding cycles.
Jesus
See,
Christ.
I'll teach about just about anything, but I might still gloss over that detail. But that's super interesting. I didn't know that, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it eugenics was very much alive in that sense, whether it had the label or not.
Right.
And that shit it continued on today, and it was instilled in folks that white or Spanish blood was desirable, speaking Spanish was desirable. And then you kind of see, I don't know, I guess it's human nature, this idea of wanting to fit in and assimilate and this constant. And then, so it's this battle, right? It's like who you are and who you think you're supposed to be and who you want to be. And that's where we're at.
Right.
So we're in the top part of we're dealing with the modern effects of what colorism has painted Mexican culture. And one of the things that I've learned while doing a little bit of research is, like, when it comes to racial self-identification, 36 identify as white, 3% identify as black, 51% as some other race. But for the most part, what that overall means is that there's not an overall connection to Latin culture, in the sense that it's like there's a lot of color blindness, and it's showing itself in a lot of really negative ways in the world, in politics, that it's just like, I don't identify as Mexican, I got here, I'm just a person, that's nothing to me. And so with no connection to culture, then it's like, yeah, I can vote for Trump, I can do this, like there's a lot of things of Latin culture that bother me, and I think colorism does play into that.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd go further, and like, it breaks my heart to say it, but I think, oppression, I think, imposes like certain forms of being on folks. And I think we've been in certain situations, like we've taken on certain labor positions, and we come as immigrants super vulnerable, undocumented, lacking rights, not knowing English, like we're vulnerable to any kind of failure here or folks taking advantage of us. So I think that's a constant. I think that's a constant struggle, and I think recognizing how it impacts you on a daily basis, I think, is the hardest part. And recognizing that it's rooted in hate and this like drive to be competitive and to like put yourself above someone, whether it's because you make enough money, like more money than them, or because you're more beautiful than them. And I think that's rooted in colonialism too, right? Like this desire to be better. Like, why do you have to compete? Like, why do you have to have this amount of money? Why do you have to look better than somebody else? Like,
you know what? That brings up a really weird point. Sidebar. I was competitive with my own siblings in a really hyper aggressive way for a long time, probably up until about maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, where it was just in me to compete against everybody and everything. I mean, I'm still working on it. Marcos has seen me play video games. But yeah, even against your own people, you're like, I want to be better than them. Better in what way? They're the exact same as you. They're from the exact same house, the exact same blood, the exact same people. Why do you need to be better?
Yeah, they got us fighting for scraps. And okay, so here's where I was alluding to.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like it's made a lot of us take on like this almost like subservient mentality. Like, we desire to be white, we negotiate our real desires with whiteness all the time. And it's really interesting because, for example, machismo is an integral part of Mexican culture, right?
That's where I was
But it's real
yeah.
funny. But put a machista man in front of a white man in, like, for example, a position of work, and you'll see the Mexican man often take on this subservient, submissive role and throw away that machismo. But when they come home, boom, there's that anger, there's that suppressed masculinity, and I got fucked over by the white man all day, so I'm gonna take it out on my kids and on my wife. So that's just one example of the toxicity and how it impacts us and how we don't even recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a perfect example of the toxicity, and it actually came in a Twitter conversation between me and Alyssa, where there was a lot of people that we grew up with being rebellious and stuff. They just were of this kind of mindset, and then they got enough scraps where they were like, "No, I don't need to like rebel that much. I'm happy with where I am." And they came up with the phrase where it's like, "Fuck the police until I reach middle management."
It's true though, and it's it all alludes back to like coping mechanisms that come from like colonization, and it's crazy. I don't know, like how do we deal with this?
Well,
I mean, invest in people.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of money there, and it's like we gotta wean America off its like imperialist, capitalist, militaristic tit. Like little by little, you can't just take away the police in a heartbeat and boom. I think it's important that we use intentional language, and we need to allocate more resources into supporting people, whether it's in education, finding a trade, finding their passion, bouncing back from any kind of struggle, you know. And I think if we do that, if we invest in people, history shows shit goes well. After World War II, fucking America invested in all their GIs, and they invested into the economy, into the infrastructure. They created a bunch of jobs in the process, and look what happened. A bunch of people became wealthy, created generational wealth for generations to come, you know?
Mm-hmm. And we'll go ahead and take now our first and only break. We'll be back after this brief hiatus. This is a perfect place to wrap up this little segment here, and then we'll get to the end after our commercial break just to see how we can figure this out, what we can do and what you can do out there to figure out this whole colorism thing, because we're still figuring it out right now. So we'll be right back after these short messages, this quick break, and we'll be right back. Thank you for watching, and stick around.